So, there are so many topics that really come to mind when we're talking about, okay, what are we going to share with consumers? We can talk animal care, we can talk dairy nutrition, food safety. What is it about sustainability that makes it such a hot button issue among consumers?
Yeah, it's been interesting looking at the data over the years. And one thing that we do consistently at DMI is that we track consumer perceptions year over year. And I would say, to the question of do consumers care about sustainability, I would say unequivocally, yes, they do care about environmental sustainability. Taking that one step further, they care about climate change and water conservation. So if you think about the weather that we've all been experiencing over the last years, I think what's making it come home for consumers is that they are experiencing it in their daily life. Hottest summers on record, right? I live here in Chicago. It's been the warmest spring or warmest February on record here in Chicago. And I think for consumers, once they start to experience those impacts of climate change personally, it continues to rise in terms of importance for them. We just saw a latest consumer data poll that looked at what's on top of mind concern for people here and around the world. And it was really interesting. Number one was war, right? Given the conflicts that we see happening around different parts of the globe. Right behind that was water conservation. And then shortly thereafter in fourth place was climate change. And so they do care, and it's becoming an increasing concern for them. Taste and nutrition still reign paramount when they're looking to make their purchasing decisions, as well as cost. But they do have that factor in the back of their mind on what can I continue to do to be more sustainable in my own life.
So, sustainability, you mentioned a couple different key points in there, climate change being one. And, it can be such a broad conversation. And where do we, as a dairy community, how do you pick your focus and how do you know that's going to resonate with consumers?
Yeah, again, we always look at what the data is showing us. And I will say to your earlier question, for what we see with consumers is that animal care and taking care of the land and taking care of the farm are inextricably linked. So if we're showing stories of you all taking good care of your animals and good care for the land, that's a plus win for us in terms of raising that belief and trust with the consumer. So we really look at the data that guides us. We also look at what thought leaders are talking about in the space to say what are they advocating for, or what are they speaking to media about in terms of importance when we think about this broad topic of environmental sustainability. And that tends to be reductions in methane. It tends to be reductions in GHG emissions overall, as well as water conservation. So we take those two data sets and we say, here's what the thought leader and the media community is talking about that consumers may be seeing in their social channels and or their own media channels. And how do we then create that content that shows the progress that's already happening today on dairy farms across the country, so that we can increase their belief. And they just, I always say consumers just want that reassurance that their favorite dairy foods are produced with care. And we have a great story to tell. And we've seen time and time again when we're putting farmers front and center and you all sharing your story with a consumer or a thought leader audience, it truly does resonate and we can see those perception scores increase.
So as you know, we have a on-site learning center on our farm, and it
Mhm.
is, you're 100% right. People actually will come in and essentially ask for permission to enjoy dairy again because
Absolutely.
of exactly why you just said, the greenhouse emissions and things that they hear about dairy. So, absolutely. And when you're looking at what kind of messaging needs to be crafted, you mentioned all the great work that farmers are already doing. How do you mix that with kind of that continuous improvement mindset that we as farmers all have? There's a lot of things we're already doing and you are sharing about, but what makes you pick specific messaging to make sure that it demonstrates that continuous improvement as
I
well?
think the messages that we find that resonate the most, one of the things, is that a farmer is more than just a farmer, right? A farmer is a climatologist, right? Because you're looking at the weather, you're evaluating a climate, a farmer is working closely with veterinarians and others, your service providers to really look for the ways in which we can continue to improve. And I think that is the one message that we've said. Consumers don't expect perfection. What they do want to see is continuous progress. And as long as we are being able to say, here's where we are today with the practices that we're using, whether that's, one of the things that consumers have found surprising is the use of byproducts in animal feed, right? So taking what would go to a landfill, i.e. almond hulls, citrus pulps, whatever it is that you all are using locally, and putting that in with the animal feed and preventing it from going to landfill, that's been a really solid and easily understood. I would say that is the other thing. Climate change can be really hard to understand in terms of the technologies and practices, but when we're able to bring it down to something easily understood that creates that emotional connection, that gives them that aha moment, that has been the power of our consumer messaging as well as our thought leader messaging. It is, here's the action that's happening today, here's the proof of the progress, and here's where we're going as an industry together going forward.
Kind of based off of the direction consumers are going and the questions they're asking, very consumer driven.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, we get a lot of questions, we get a lot of data. And again, it's those key time and time again, what we hear from them is, how are farmers conserving water? How are farmers, what about this thing called cow farts, cow burps? That is something that we see a lot of, and just even clarifying for them where enteric methane comes from. We actually did a Time magazine partnership last fall or last summer that was all about water conservation, and it performed extremely well. Time magazine is something that actually surprised me that Gen Z, it's a favorite publication of Gen Z. They like to go in depth on certain topics that they have questions and concerns about. And so being able to work with them to showcase the ways in which farmers across the country, and it's such a regional issue, right?
Mhm.
In terms of where you live in the country and the water conservation or water quality issues, but being able to show the depth and breadth of the practices that are happening on farms across the country, that was a really positive, strong piece for us in the marketplace.
And that's a good point. What we're doing in Ohio may not be top of mind for folks in Texas, for example. So it sounds like you really craft your messaging to encompass a wide variety and a wide range, meet everything.
Yeah, and that's where we really work hand in glove or hand in hand with our state and regional marketing and communications teams. They have the best understanding of what's happening locally and the farms and the stories that are, of stories of progress, dependent upon the concerns and questions of the consumers in their region. So we work with them to, one, elevate those stories of progress nationally to use in our national creative and execution, but they are then working to make sure that those stories are getting out to those consumers in those markets through digital and social channels. And so it's a really nice partnership that we have to ensure that we're touching upon the regionality and localization and customization of the content while we then elevate stories at that national level.